I'm an only child. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Arizona, just like I was telling Mr. Mars. And there was no medical school in Arizona back then. I went to medical school at the University of Oregon, and I did my postgraduate training at UCLA. That's what I did. That's my life.
What years was that?
Oh, let's see, 59 to 63, 63 to 67, and 67 to 70. Nobody with my education and training would voluntarily join the military. I mean, there would be no reason for that. I mean, in my opinion, I was drafted because back then there was a draft. There isn't a draft now, and that brings up a whole series of other problems. I knew that eventually I was going to have to go somewhere, or I was going to have to serve somewhere. I was probably drafted back in the early to mid '60s. I think I was drafted when I was still in medical school. If you were fortunate, you could postpone your obligation to complete specialty training. You know, how that worked, I'm not 100% sure. It probably had something to do with what specialties the government decided that they needed. The kids today have no idea what the draft is all about. I have some opinions about that because, you know, if everybody has to serve their country, it gives them quite a bit better insight into freedom, you know, what the United States is all about, and a number of other things that, you know, that happen when you have to serve your country in some way, shape, or form. I mean, not necessarily join a branch of the military, but serve your country in some way. There are a lot of countries that do that. I mean, women and men have to do that. That doesn't exist anymore, and you know, I think there's an upside and a downside to that. And I just told you the downside because folks don't have a good appreciation of what freedom is all about. On the other hand, you know, parents don't have to worry about their kids going off and potentially getting killed because that's, you know, old soldiers never die. It's just the young ones, or for the most part. So I was drafted. I was fortunate enough to obtain a deferment and to finish my specialty training. And the day I finished my specialty training, they said, "Thank you very much. Here you are." I mean, I did everything I could. I mean, I did everything I could to avoid going to Vietnam. My attendings at UCLA and other folks that I knew, you know, knew the top dog in anesthesia in the Army, because that's who drafted me. And I did everything I could to avoid going to Vietnam. And and this guy said, he says, "Listen," he says, "you're a fully trained anesthesiologist. We need anesthesiologists." He said, "You going to Vietnam?" So I went. I got this piece of paper that said, "Be here at such and such and such." So first I went to San Antonio. It was basic training for 5 weeks maybe of worthless information where they tried to teach me to be a soldier, you know, and a bunch of us were there. I mean, a bunch of us doctors were there, and you know, and I knew that I was going right from there straight to Vietnam. They wanted to teach me to be a soldier, and I said, "I'm not a soldier, I'm a doctor," you know, and they had all these folks that, you know, kept telling me, "Your uniform's not right, and you're not doing this right, and you're not doing that right," you know. And finally I just said, you know, leave me alone, because the worst thing that can happen to me is I'm going to Vietnam, and I'm already going, you know. So you can't punish me by sending me to Vietnam, because I know I'm already going. So I mean, they try to teach us a lot of worthless stuff. At least for me, they try to teach us a lot of terribly worthless stuff about tropical medicine and malaria and this and that. I mean, I'm an anesthesiologist. I mean, we're going to be operating on people, and that's pretty much the only time I ever had to wear my uniform when I was at Fort Sam. Otherwise, it was it was, I never wore it. It was in the summer of 1970. I mean, I had finished my specialty training on June 30th. Okay, probably a week later, I got a letter that says report to San Antonio to, I don't remember, Medical Field Service, MFSS, some crap, some letter thing that said report here to San Antonio, and then you'll be on your way to Vietnam. I must have been a major because I was a major when I got out. So I suppose it's possible. I mean, it's possible that the first few days or something I could have been a captain or something, but I think I was probably a major. That little orange, the little oak leaf cluster thing. Yeah, you know, whatever it was a play rank. You know, we all called ourselves. You ask Gus, we all called ourselves play majors. You know, and we didn't know what it was all about, except for in San Antonio when you know everybody thought that they should teach everybody to be a soldier. Nobody bothered you. I mean, you were a high enough rank, so nobody bothered you, basically, about soldier stuff. I'd been on a plane for I don't know how long, and I looked, and I said, why would anybody want to be in this godforsaken place? I was from military base to military base, but I'm looking around, I didn't see any sounds or smells. I mean, I was at some compound, at some camp, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, you know, this is a godforsaken jungle full of mosquitoes, diseases, and I could tell very quickly that this is a third world country. And I'm thinking, what on earth, you know, what on earth am I? And then in a larger perspective, what on earth are we, meaning the USA? What are we doing here? My initial stuff is try to keep getting bit by mosquitoes because if there's 50 people in a room and one mosquito, the mosquito will find me. They gave me a cot or something, put me under some netting, and then they started handing out uniforms, and then they told us, you know, then they told me where I'm going. So then I'm getting on another airplane, and you know, and you're going to Fubai. And I get off the plane at Fubai, which isn't very far from, what turned out not to be very far from the hospital. And I'm thinking to myself, if you wanted to give the earth an enema, you'd put the tip in Fubai. So here I am, you know, out in the middle of nowhere, and there are all these Asian people, you know, all sitting around, you know, doing this or doing that, eating or this or that, and I'm saying, you know, what on earth are we doing here? And then they transported me to the 85th Evacuation Hospital. It was a Navy and Marine installation before they bailed out and abandoned it. It was built in about 1968, and when the Marines and the Navy left, the 85th Evacuation Hospital, which I was told was in some other location, moved to Fubai. You know, if you were within a certain geographical radius of where we were and you got hurt or wounded, they transported you to our hospital. I think officially we were, in quotes, you know, we were supporting the 101st Airborne Division. We were 10 miles from Hue, and Camp Eagle was where the 101st was. I was told I'm not to say what we called the 101st. They called themselves the Screaming Eagles. Yeah, we called them the Pukin Buzzards. The 101st Airborne Division was what was there. Okay, and I mean, I guess theoretically we're supporting them. If you were a casualty and you were within chopper range or whatever, you came to our hospital. If you had certain types of wounds, then you were supposed to go a little bit farther toward the coast and south to the, I can't remember the name of the installation, but it was in Da Nang, and that was across the hill and through the pass from us, because they had neurosurgery capability and we didn't have neurosurgery capability. So if somebody was if it was determined by somebody, whoever was doing the triage, that it was only a head injury, they would go to Da Nang. And if it was pretty much anything else that was close enough, they would come to us. Our numbers, our stats, were about the same, I'm told, as they've been in Iraq and Afghanistan and in whatever it was, the Desert Storm thing. We were able to do what we do because we had people that had just finished their training that knew what they were doing and knew how to operate. That's the whole reason that we were successful. I don't think there was anything cutting edge. I mean, there's nothing cutting edge about meatball surgery, you know, about trauma surgery. You know, the first 10 cases you see are kind of interesting, and for surgeons, you know, they like to operate. You know, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So they like, you know, the surgeons like to operate, but basically we were just doing the same thing over and over and over. And depending upon what the casualties were, sometimes we would work, you know, we could work for 2-3 days straight, and then we could not work for a week. It just depended upon where the casualties were and how they came. I have no idea what the patient census was. The maximum number of operating rooms that we were capable of running at one time was 3. They were not exceedingly well equipped, and we pretty much had the basic necessities. At the the second year of my residency, I was involved, well, I guess through my whole residency, you know, we were involved a lot in clinical research. And there were a couple of drugs that everybody knows about now that we did clinical investigations on at UCLA. And so now I don't want to get anybody in any trouble, but most of them are either retired or passed away, or the statute of limitations is gone. But there were a couple of drugs that I had been clinically investigating as a resident with my attendings, that it immediately struck me that these were some ideal medications for hypovolemic trauma patients, you know, young healthy people whose basic problem was trauma and associated blood loss. And because the drugs that we were using to put these people to sleep, you know, just put the blood pressure in the toilet, and that, you know, made the blood pressure fall. And even young healthy kids can only tolerate so much hypotension. So we had ketamine and pancuronium, and neither one were clinically event. Roger just discovered, I just discovered yesterday when I was talking to him, Roger says, "Oh, so that's where we got the ketamine," you know, because he had never used it in his residency. But he picked up on it pretty well, and you know, and I told everybody how to use it. And Roger says, "Yeah," he says, "I was using that ketamine in Fubai." I said, "Do you know where it came from?" Roger says, "No." I says, "It was probably illegal, but nobody cared back then. They were shipping it to me by the carload from UCLA." And I said, "Hey, you know, I called them up because I got hooked up with my wife-to-be there." The most important thing about Kathy at that time was she had the only stateside phone on the compound. So she was the only one at the whole 85th evac that you could pick up the phone and call the States, because she was in charge of arranging emergency leaves for people whose wives were having babies, or for people that were injured and this or that had to go. So she had the only stateside.
She worked in the Red Cross.
She was a Red Cross lady, yeah, Donut Dolly. And so I hooked up with her mostly because she wouldn't want to say it, and everybody else in the 85th knew. I hooked up with her because she had the only, so I got on her stateside phone, and I called back to the anesthesia department at UCLA, and I said, listen, I said, could really use some ketamine and pancuronium. I says, because all we got here is healthy people that don't have enough blood, and we put them to sleep with pentothal and curare, and bad things happen. I says, if we could give them ketamine and pancuronium to start them out, I said, that would really be good. That was all it took. Nobody opened the packages, nobody did anything. It came, and I taught everybody how to, I taught my OJTs, I taught my nurse anesthetists. I was the only anesthesiologist there. And they threw me in there and said, okay, you're supposed to run an operating room. You're the chief of anesthesia and operative service. I said, really?
How many nurse anesthetists worked for you?
I have no idea for sure.
And
Probably at least 4 or 5 or 6, and I had 2 OJTs, the 12-week wonders, that went through, that decided to do 12 weeks in some specialties so they could get out of being in the bush. I know they had them in anesthesia, they had them in orthopedics, and they had them in a couple of other specialties, and they went to some Army hospital somewhere, well, if you were in the Army, and they taught you how to do, well, they allegedly taught you how to do anesthesia in 12 weeks. Well, that can't be done. You can't learn how to be an anesthesiologist in 12 weeks. But they were young, they were bright, they had been to medical school, and I knew how to train residents, because I knew how to train residents. So I had 2 junior residents, and I don't know, 4 or 5 nurse anesthetists. One of whom is here, and he knew what he didn't know. He knew the difference between an anesthesiologist and a nurse anesthetist, and he wanted to learn what he didn't know. The rest of the nurse anesthetists didn't know what they didn't know, and they didn't care. Okay, and even though I was the chief of anesthesia and operative services, they didn't want to really pay much attention to me. And finally I said, hey, I said, this is the way you're going to do it. I says, and if you don't do it this way, I'll figure out some way. I had no idea what to do. I said, I'll figure out some way to get you into trouble. All right, because this is the way we're taking care of our patients. So that was it. And the hospital commander was really a goofy guy. I mean, he was an OBGYN who probably hadn't practiced in I don't know how long. And we didn't deliver any babies there. But he knew one thing. He knew that, well, first of all, he liked me for one reason or another. I have no idea. But he knew that we were running a good shop, and he didn't want to mess with it. He didn't want to upset the apple cart. So he didn't bother me. He left me alone. I mean, I was living in the nurses' compound. Because the Red Cross lady lived with the nurses in a nurses' compound. And she had an air conditioner and all sorts of stuff that I didn't have in my beautiful hooch, which was right. It was the other side of Gus and Bob's. Okay, all 3 of us were in the same hooch. Augustinelli, Kapler, and me were all in the same hooch. But that part was my hooch in name only. I moved into the nurses' compound pretty early on, and there was only a couple people that really cared about it. There was one chief nurse was unhappy, but really couldn't do anything because Kathy was basically a civilian. Okay, I mean, he's working for the Red Cross, so this person has no military authority, and the hospital commander said, you're running a good shop, do whatever you want. I'm not going to bother you. I mean, he'd invite me to his trailer and all sorts, to chat about stuff and all sorts of stuff. So that was the way it worked. And we had good surgeons, and we provided good care, and we had illegal drugs that were good for our patients, and that was it. I mean, about a month for me would have been enough. Okay, I can look back and say, well, that was my trauma fellowship, but I didn't need a trauma fellowship. There was plenty of trauma in Los Angeles. I mean, it's not like I had to go someplace to try and find it. And a month would have been about enough. 365 days was just awful. I mean, it's the worst 365 days of my life that I can remember. You know, the only good thing is that I met my wife there, and she said, "You better tell him that, okay, or you'll get into trouble." So, but that was it. And I mean, and they had flush toilets in the nurses' compound too. I mean, you can't believe the squalor and the stuff that we're doing, living out here in the middle of nowhere. You know, living out here in the middle of the jungle. You know, I mean, and the food was terrible, and I mean, everything was just awful. As soon as we came back from Vietnam, we got married in November '71.
So 40-some years.
Yeah,
That's
to the same
fantastic.
person, obviously, yeah. It'll be 43 years, I guess, this November. Whoever came to us, we treated. And the problem was, a lot of time you didn't know whether they were your friends or not your friends if they came to you. If they came to you wounded, you know, or injured, basically you treat them. So you didn't know whether they were the regular old South Vietnamese who were supposed to be our allies, or whether they were the Viet Cong. I mean, you didn't know you didn't know who your friends were or who your friends weren't. Certain of us were friendlier than others because we worked in the same area, but there were some other folks, like Bob was an internist, and there was another internist, and we struck it off well. And you know, I mean, you got to make some friends when you're drinking with the same people every night. Okay, I mean, you know, there wasn't anything to do here. Okay, I mean, there wasn't anything. There was very little, if anything, to do, except try and forget where you were. Well, we had a better system worked out than that. I went on one R&R, and I don't remember what the timing was or anything like that. I mean, Kathy and I went together. It wasn't very long. I mean, it was probably less than a week, and the transportation was, you know, you could sit in the airport for 10 hours waiting for your transportation to leave for your R&R. I think we wound up going to Australia, but we had a triage system because there were certain types of injuries, like major vascular injuries and burns, were two of the examples that all we could do was stabilize. And once we got them stabilized, we had to evacuate them, and we evacuated them to one of two places, either, a military facility in Japan, or a military facility in the Philippines. I think some of them went to whatever hospital was associated with Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, and some went to, I'm trying to remember the name of the hospital in Japan. And so we had a rotation. And these patients had to be medically accompanied because that was the rule. So we had a rotation of medically accompaniment, and that usually got you a minimum of 5 days out of hell somewhere, either in Japan or in the Philippines. The best place was Japan, and you'd get loaded up with money to go shopping for everybody at the PXs in Japan, because they had stuff, you know, that we didn't have in Vietnam. So I mean, you'd wind up, you know, with a couple $1,000s in your pocket to buy everything from cameras to stereo equipment, and everything for everybody. Oh, you're going to you're the next one up for a medevac or whatever to Japan. You know, here, get me this, or get me that. We had a system, so we got to get out of country more than just the one R&R. Now, if you're really smart, you had a pregnant wife at home, and you got to go back for the baby. And we had some people went back for the baby, and Did they come back? Well, no,
Wow.
they did not. They did not come. I don't know how they did it. I mean, I guess if it was me and I would have done it, I'd just say, I'm not getting on the plane and going back there. You know, shoot me. I don't know what to, I don't know what to tell you. The toughest part is that the surgeons wanted to operate all the time. And the hardest part for me, they wanted to do elective surgery, because there was no shortage of pathology walking around. Okay, I mean, people with tumors and goiter. I mean, there was all sorts of, and the hardest part for me was limiting how much elective surgery my surgeons could do, because everybody gets bored sitting around. And for me, it was, for me and my department, it was fine. But the surgeons got bored and they said, I want to operate. I got this guy over here with a big hernia or this or that, And I said, well, we can do it, but we're going to do it, only certain days of the week and, in certain times, because we can't have an operating room being tied up if we've got casualties coming in. So you can only do certain types of cases, certain times and everything. And, there was some push. I mean, there was pushback about that. But then I said, hey, go ahead and operate on anybody you want. I said, but do it without anesthesia. And they said, you got a good point. Yeah, we rotated call. But I mean, but you never knew what call. I mean, you never know when casualties were going to come in, and depending upon what came in, I always wanted to be there. I said, if it's a small case. If it's not a major case and there's only one patient, you're only running one room, I said, I'll, call me if you need me. Okay. But if there's more than one room running, or if there's really, big cases, I said I want to be there, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter when it is. There weren't any lawyers or anybody else that was going to, get you into trouble if you came to the operating room after you'd had a beer or something like that. There wasn't anybody that was going to give you a hard time about it. I mean, and so so you just went about your business, and if you got called, you got called. I don't know when it was, 10 o'clock at night, and we're all 4 sheets to the wind, and Gus hurts himself, so we got to take him. We got to take him to the operating room and fix him. It was an awful place. I could never figure out for sure why we were there, and I still can't figure out why this country does what it does. The British couldn't win on our soil. Okay, I'm talking about the Revolutionary War. The British couldn't win on our soil. And every place that we've been, Korea, Vietnam, all the places in the Middle East, what do we learn from generation to generation? What do we learn? Because as soon as we leave, the bad guys take over. And it's been that way. It's like, it's impossible to win, I think, to win in a foreign country when you're not on your own soil. And frankly, there are probably some countries that may be better off not being a democracy than being a democracy. I'm just thinking, what have we learned sending all these young kids out for nothing? And it's very, to me, it's very, very sad that we don't learn the lessons. And I'm looking and I'm reading about everything. I'm learning Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm thinking, what lesson did we learn from Vietnam that we haven't applied here? And the answer is everything. And then the poor kids get back. The poor kids get back. You're not going to like this. The poor kids get back and are subjected to the lowest quality medical care that this country has to offer. You know, and that's the VA system. And I just feel so bad. I mean, the folks that are going in now, the people that are choosing to enlist in the military, are mostly those folks that don't have enough education to get a job in our society, you know, for the most part. And they're hoping that they're gonna pick up some skills while they're in the military that are gonna make them competitive enough to be in the workforce when they get out. And everything that I see, they're not learning. They're not learning those skills for them to become competitive in the marketplace when they get out of the military, so that they can get a job. So they're jobless and they're homeless, and the poor. I mean, I can tell you my story about the VA. I developed a disease, I don't know, probably about 2006, that was clearly related to dioxin, which is the major chemical ingredient in Agent Orange. That was clearly related to dioxin exposure when I was in Vietnam. So I went to the VA and I said, hey, listen, I've got this bladder tumor, and my urologist wrote a letter, and my urologist says this is most likely related. Okay, they've got some kind of law that lists about 50 different cancers and tumors that are automatically associated with Agent Orange. But bladder cancer is not one of them. Why? Because they obviously used no science in creating this law back in 91 or 92. And so I said, you know, I'll show you the literature that says that dioxin is a carcinogen, et cetera, et cetera. And I kept getting these letters back. And they kept saying, you know, denied, denied, denied. And I said, is it possible for me to get to talk to a human to make my case? And I got no positive response. So I'm still a legal resident of the state of Arizona. So I got a hold of my senator, who's no small potatoes. You know, I got a hold of Senator John McCain's office. I mean, we know, he knows me, I know him. And I said, Senator, I says, I got this problem. I said, I can't get the VA to even talk to me. And in less than 72 hours, the VA talked to me. I went in, saw a human being. I said, here's the information, here's this. I mean, it was a doctor, okay? And I was doing this in San Diego, which is crawling with military, okay? I mean, mostly Navy. And he said, yeah, he says, you're right. You know, I said, I'm not even asking for any money. All I'm asking is for you to say that my bladder cancer is service-connected. And he says, you're right, we'll put it on there. And I said, you know, thank you very much. And I'm just thinking to myself, you know, I'm a knowledgeable, intelligent person, and here I have to go to this length to get my story listened to. I said, well, what are these other poor people doing? So that's a whole nother story. But I don't think that the VA healthcare system is giving our veterans, particularly the young ones, you know, that are coming back, are giving them the best care that they deserve. When there wasn't any casualties and there wasn't anything to do, and I could sit around, play ping pong, and not have to worry about wounded GIs flooding my operating rooms. I mean, you know, it's like, it's one of these, question, do you still beat your wife type questions. I mean, you know, are you saying, sure, there was satisfaction in patching people up that were hurt and wounded, but on the other hand, you patch them up, but you didn't even have any say in what was going to happen to them afterwards. I mean, you patch them up, and some of them went right back out to duty. You know, you're thinking, wow, we healed this, we fixed this person up, and now they're going to be out there where they can get injured again. So I mean, it's the same satisfaction you get, you know, taking good care of a patient and having a good outcome and that sort of stuff. But there were no best days. Every day was every day was about as miserable as it could get. I can't figure any day that's any worse than others. They all pretty much blended together. There was no best day. There was no worst day. It was just all. I mean, it was just all the same thing. 24/7, 365 days, and it was. I mean, it was terrible. The only way you could have contact was through the postal service, and so you could get, postcards and letters, and I would write my mom and dad, and then I felt really bad telling them how horrible it was, and what a crappy place this was to be, and all that sort of stuff. I'd call them every now and then since I had access to the phone, and say hi, but that was pretty much it. And nobody, there was one of my good friends sent me a card pretty much every week. And other than that, there wasn't anybody back stateside that gave two hoots, as far as I'm concerned, where I was. So I mean, I'm not a big letter writer and this or that, but I mean, all my friends and everything, they knew where I was. And there wasn't a big communication thing with me. My duty was September of 70 to September of 71. I don't remember the actual dates. I can just tell you that I was there 365 days, and I arranged to, because some of the flights to get back home when you were done with your tour were just abysmal. I mean, you could sit in the airport for I don't know how long. So I arranged when it was time for me to go with all my colleagues that there was a patient that needed to be evacuated. And so I jumped on an airplane with and all my stuff. I jumped on an airplane, and then I was in Clark Air Force, the Clark Air Force in the Philippines. There was a general and thoracic surgeon that I knew from UCLA that was in the Air Force that was stationed there. So I called him up, and we sat around and talked for a little bit, and I went to the, wherever you go, this is the Air Force now. So they know about, they got better air transportation than the Army does. So I just went in there and I said, hey, I'm out of Vietnam, and I was in a jump seat in a C-141, one of those, a big military jet. In no time at all, I went from there. I went to Okinawa. I got off the plane, and there was a nurse anesthetist that I knew from Fort Sam, or from somebody had told me about it, and he outranked me, which is good. So I went and rung him up in Okinawa, and I said, listen, I need to, help me get home. So next thing I know, I'm on another plane to Hawaii. So then I get off the plane on the Air Force base in Hawaii, which is, the runways are immediately adjacent to the commercial airport in Honolulu. I got out of the military plane, I walked across the tarmac, and so I was at whatever the airport's called in Honolulu now.
Okay.
And I walked up and showed her my orders, and in no time at all, I was on an airplane from there to San Francisco, and then from San Francisco back to Phoenix, and that was that was my trip. And the reception was, I mean, it was the most unpopular war we've ever been in, for one reason or another, and nobody cared about it. I mean, that's probably what Bob's talking about, my uniform. I mean, I never wore my uniform when I was in Vietnam. I mean, I walked around in a pair of Bermuda shorts, tennis shoes, and an OD green t-shirt. And nobody bothered me. And when I came back, my second duty assignment was in San Francisco at Letterman General Hospital, which is no longer on the Presidio. And I wasn't chief of anything there, but the anti-war sentiment was so strong in particular locations. San Francisco was one of them. We were instructed not to wear our uniforms. So I didn't wear my uniform. I didn't wear my uniform well, it wasn't a full year, but my second 10 months at Letterman General, I didn't wear my uniform either. I dressed like I was a real doctor going to a real hospital. I mean, I put on slacks and a shirt and a tie and a clinic coat. And so that's why Bob is saying I'm known as the guy who never wore a uniform. People keep asking me about, well, is there a story behind your Bronze Star? And I said, well, there may be, but if there is, I don't remember it. And you can read the certificate that comes with it, and it doesn't go into any detail. It says, for heroism or this or that or valor or whatever, words the military and the government use. I personally don't recall any specific event that I can associate with this, and my wife doesn't know. My wife doesn't know either, and she knows everything. So I really don't have a clue. All I know is I got it. One of my OJTs actually was assigned. He was with me at the same hospital in San Francisco. There was a small group of us that just kept in contact with each other over the years. And in particular, Gus and I and his wife and my wife and everything kept in contact for long. I mean, we traveled together and we visited each other and stayed at each other's houses. And some other folks, another internist I don't think he's coming in until tomorrow, Mike Grossman. I don't think you're scheduled to interview
we
him.
Are
you? Okay, well, you'll like Mike. A number of us just kept in contact. Not close contact, but close, but close enough. And I guess the only thing for sure that we had in common was 365 days of hell in this godforsaken country. And then sometime in about 2005, Gus and I were probably into our third bottle of wine, and we were thinking, why not see if we can get the folks that were in Fubai at the 85th together. So we did 06, 08, 10, 12, and now 14. So this will be the 5th 85th evacuation hospital we've done. Gus created a website, and people have found us on the 85th evacuation website, and we keep new people keep coming every reunion who were there during that period of time.
That's
and because
wonderful.
they find us. We don't necessarily find them. It's been tough because we try to find some people and we found out they're no longer living, which gets to be common at our age. I don't know how wonderful it is. It's like misery loves company. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not a diagnosis back then, okay? Did some of us have post-traumatic stress disorder? Probably. Did we manage to adapt or adjust to it? We probably did. I just put it out of my mind. I said, that's the worst year of my life. I met my wife, and that's the good part. And everything else was a year of misery. And that's the best it could be. And everybody says, thank you for your service, thank you for your service. And I said, you're very welcome. I says, but it was not voluntary. That's the first thing I say. It was not voluntary. I says, I was drafted. Me, personally, I just put it out of my mind and try and forget about it. You know, we show all these slides and everything, and we have these reunions every 2 years, and I'm thinking, oh my God, did that really happen? And, you know, but the whole, I mean, it's been 40 some years now, it's been almost 45 years. And I just wipe it out of your memory bank. Now the people that are, I was just talking to a lady here that works at the hotel. I don't remember exactly what department she's in, but you know, she just had a son come back from from Afghanistan, and you know, I said, well, he had a couple of years of college, and then I don't know, he decided to enlist or whatever, and you know, I said, well, now that he's back, is he going back to school? And she says, well, he's having a really tough time because his best buddy died in his arms. Oh. So that sort of, we were not exposed to that experience. I mean, we had patients that we did our best, but we knew they had lethal injuries. We knew they were unsalvageable. We did our best to save them, but we knew that wasn't 100%, but we knew we were doing a pretty good job. And that's, you know, that's the best that you can say about it, because it was, you know, it was terrible. And I don't think that if I had it, I don't think I had a severe case of it or whatever. You know, I just pretty much wiped the year out of my memory bank.
Sir, is there any memory or experience from your service in Vietnam that has stayed with you through the years and has had a lasting influence on your life or changed you in some way?
Only my wife. It's not the sharpest knives in the drawer or the brightest bulbs in the scoreboard that enlist anymore. And that's reality. And I'm not going to change that, and nobody's going to change it. I'm a volunteer police officer where I live, which is the only time I ever have to wear a uniform is when I go out there. And there's one of my police volunteer colleagues is a retired 2-star general. And the only thing he ever tells me, he says as soon as they abolished the draft, he says the IQ of the Army dropped about 15 points. Wow. And I said, really, Don? He said, yeah. He says that's reality. You know, or if they've, you know, people that have got a marketable skill that can get a job don't enlist. So I just feel bad for them because they come out, you know, and what kind of skill do you have? You know, well, there's not a lot of demand for somebody who can lay a really great Claymore mine. And then they're stuck with the VA healthcare system, which you've already heard, I don't think is even close to cutting edge. So all I can say is I feel sorry for them. Should we reinstate the draft? I don't know. I think that it will make, I told you this already, so I mean, I think it will make people appreciate freedom and appreciate this country more if everybody had to serve their country in some way, shape, or form. Not necessarily always the military, but it's not going to happen in a lifetime. I mean, I wish that the members of Congress had to get their health care through the VA. Okay, that would, or be in any sort of system like everybody else. And then they would see exactly what it's all about. I mean, because even the people at the very top of the VA hierarchy allegedly had, I mean, they either fired or they either resigned or were fired recently. They have no idea what's going on in their own system, that they're, you know, that they're forging records and this and that in terms of veterans getting seen, by a veterans getting seen in the system. I mean, those of us that have been in medicine for a while said, this is the way it's been forever. I think it's remembered as a big mistake. And from which we haven't learned anything, because we've gone 3 more times to foreign soil in the Middle East. And like I said, as soon as we leave, the bad guys are going to take over, and all we've done is waste lives and and young people, young people's blood. I don't think most people gave a hoot about the Vietnam War. I mean, you're calling it a conflict, and that's because that was apparently the politically correct thing to do. I don't know the difference between a conflict and a war. Do people get killed in conflicts, or more people get killed in wars than get killed in conflicts? I don't know. I can't separate that. I can't separate that out. War is war, and killing people is killing people. It was probably a biggest waste of time, energy, resources, lives, and anything else that you can think of for us to go over to this godforsaken place and think that we were going to be able to change it. I mean, who's in charge? The North Vietnam owns the country. It's it's their country. They were the bad guys, and they won. Back in World War I and World War II, it was pretty easy to determine whether you won or lost. I mean, you bombed the heck out of everybody until somebody put up a white flag and surrendered. But I don't know how you figure out in the Middle East and Vietnam who won or who lost. But I don't see that we won anything, and all we did was waste our time. There's nothing good about war. Humans have been humans, and human behavior has been human behavior since forever. But the bottom line is, I mean, go back as far as you want. The Greeks, the Romans, everybody. There's nothing really good about war, and you should only do it when absolutely necessary. And I think right now, I'm not privy to all the intelligence that is. We used to have a saying for that too, contradictory terms, military intelligence. I don't know what the intelligence issues are, but I don't see that we've learned anything, that we keep going into these other godforsaken places to try and be the world's policeman. It would be, in my opinion, it would be a lot better if we use the resources to improve this country rather than trying to be the savior of the world. I mean, humans are humans, human behavior is human behavior, and I don't think it's ever going to change. But the folks that are making the decisions, I guess, don't have the corporate memory to be smart enough, in my opinion, I think they should, to stay out of this stuff, whether you want to call it a war, whether you want to call it a conflict, because I don't see any benefit. I don't see any benefit accruing to the USA from doing this stuff. And I mean, the problem with the folks that make these decisions is their primary goal is keeping their job, and keeping their job means getting reelected. And everybody who's in politics, their first 3 primary goals are getting reelected, number 1, getting reelected, number 2, and getting reelected, number 3. And for the most part, that drives their behavior. In other words, they do what they think or what their advisors tell them they should do in order to keep their job, meaning keep getting reelected. I mean, the president's got term limits, but pretty much nobody else does. I mean, I don't want to sound really bitter or anything else. I mean, this is still the best country on the planet, okay? But it still doesn't mean we do everything right. I thought it was nice. I thought it was well done. Could have gone up a little quicker, but that's that's the nature of things. I mean, I thought it was nice. If it educates people, it's fine. Well, I don't know if there was something magic about having to wait 50 years in order to do it. I mean, maybe it could have been done 25 years ago, could have been the 25th anniversary. I think that maybe folks are finally just getting around to figuring out that the folks that served in Vietnam were sort of swept under the carpet for a long period of time, and they're trying to make nice and and educate people and let folks know what was going on. I mean, it's just fine. You know, it's the government at its best.